My next amendment, number 41, is a statement of legislative intent around a carbon fee as a way of paying for tax reform. I'm proud to be joined by Mr. Huffman, Mr. Lowenthal, Mr. Pocan, Mr. McEachin, and Mr. McNerney. And the discussion came up with Mr. Neal earlier that there was insufficient support for the border adjustment tax. Well, a number of us have another idea for generating the kind of revenue that will allow us to bring down rates, and that is a carbon fee. We expect a $25 per ton surcharge on carbon will generate $1 trillion over 10 years. That would allow tax cuts of $1 trillion to corporate taxes, to income taxes. It would also address the negative and expensive externalities of pollution. And that's why many conservatives like George Shultz and center-right think tanks have called for a carbon tax to be the basis of tax reform. With the revenues from carbon fees, we can reduce taxes across the board, bring back millions of manufacturing jobs that we need to build clean energy infrastructure and upgrade our grid. I ask you to include my amendment, and along with Mr. Huffman, Lowenthal, Pocan, McEachin, and McNerney in the final bill, and I'll move on to my next amendment. The next amendment, I'll mention several together, and it's numbers 46, 45, 42, and 48. And the reason that we address these together is they all relate to subsidizing energy one way or the other. For instance, number 48 would generate significant revenue by ending the expensing of intangible drilling costs. The expensing of intangible drilling costs allows companies to immediately deduct most of the cost of drilling a new well, despite the fact that the risks associated with drilling new wells are no longer present or take longer to recognize. So, if we're going to have these kinds of incentives in the tax code for fossil fuels, I have three that it's important to put on the other side for renewable energy. One is the wind production tax credit. This bill is supposed to create jobs. And that's why Mr. Huffman, Connolly, Keating, Pocan, McEachin, McNerney, Welsh, and Ms. Tsongas and I have brought forward an amendment to restore the wind production tax credit. If we were to cut, as the current language does, the wind production tax credit in an industry that's already invested $143 billion in the U.S. economy, has jobs across our state, in the city of Pueblo, Colorado, over 800 jobs at Vestas making wind turbines, employs over 100,000 Americans in all 50 states, those jobs are jeopardized by the language in this bill. This bill is an outright attack on creating jobs and threatens the jobs of those 100,000 people who work in the wind energy industry. And my amendment would simply reinstate the wind production tax credit. I hope we make it in order. My amendment number 45, that I'm proud to bring forward along with Representatives Cahoon, Connolly, Lowenthal, Pocan, Huffman, Welsh, and McNerney, would reinstate the electric vehicle tax credit. The EV tax credit amendment has created jobs already, benefited consumers, helped promote technology and innovation, and more sustainable energy for powering our motor vehicles, and led to cleaner air, which we all benefit from, which leads to lower healthcare costs. American companies like GM and Tesla have used this credit. It's become a bipartisan success story. As one car company said, eliminating the electric vehicle tax credit would hurt the environment, hurt jobs, and hamper progress being made to reduce carbon emissions. And I hope that number 45 is made in order. My amendment number 42, which I'm joined by Mr. Price, Mr. Huffman, Mr. Pocan, Mr. McEachin, Mr. Connolly, and Mr. Cahoon, would increase the tax credit for the use of residential solar panels. This amendment would be a boost for the solar energy industry, revamp America's leadership in the technology we created, and promote increased clean energy investment by creating a short-term surge of funding in small, distributed generation solar systems. Moving to my amendment 48, this is one on the other side of the ledger. This is a tax break for oil and gas. So I'm happy with either way the committee chooses to go, as long as it's, either get rid of all of those special treatments so we don't have government picking winners and losers in fossil fuels, or do a similar set to be the equivalent of those preferential treatment for renewable energy. Right now, this is heavily weighted towards fossil fuels because it includes the special tax provisions that fossil fuel industry takes advantage of and eliminates even the existing tax incentives around renewables. So again, to be clear, I'm not saying we need to do both. I'm happy if we put them all to the floor, we can let the members decide, or this committee can decide, probably most consistent with the direction of tax reform, let's get rid of the special tax expenditures for fossil fuels. But if the committee wants to, we could simply put the ones back in for renewable energy. The other one, and I've offered amendments to do both things to fix this, is addressing master limited partnerships. Along with Mr. Huffman and Mr. Pocan, I have two amendments designed to even the playing field between renewable energies and fossil fuels with respect to master limited partnerships, or MLPs. As you know, Mr. Chairman, they're a corporate form that's mostly used by natural resource firms to avoid corporate income tax, effectively giving an advantage to exploration and extraction of fossil fuels. My first MLP amendment simply would allow MLPs to be used for renewable energy companies who are currently prohibited from using master limited partnerships, along with the tax advantages that bestows. The alternative way of going, Mr. Chairman, and the reason that we offered two amendments, is that we can also prohibit fossil fuel companies from using master limited partnerships. So that, again, would, rather than having the government pick winners and losers, allow renewable energy and fossil fuel companies to compete. So I'm comfortable with either direction, to be clear, but I hope that the committee would make in order at least one of those amendments that I've offered, along with Mr. Huffman and Mr. Pocan.